Dear young people, no, older people didn't mess up your world. Recently at the UN climate talks, British institution David Attenborough said that older generations had messed up the planet and had let down younger people. At the same event, 15-year-old Greta Thunberg said that world leaders had ignored the issue for 25 years and added, "Our political leaders have failed us." These were just the latest expressions of a sentiment that's been peddled often in discussion about this issue for the last few years. The same dynamic went on to infect how people talked about Brexit in the UK and the election of Donald Trump in the US, but we'll leave those to one side for this video and focus on this key question. Is the environmental crisis an example of the older generation betraying the younger generation? Here's a quick heads up. My answer's no. My message to any younger people watching this video is to resist the attempts to artificially turn this into a generational conflict. Making it into a us versus them discussion is the fastest way to fail to solve the problem, because it's a common problem and it'll either have a common solution or it won't be a solution. And to come to a common solution, you have to understand how we got here and what we need to do to get out. The first thing to understand is the older generation didn't inherit a perfect world which they proceeded to mess up. The truth is, every generation has inherited problems they have to solve, because at no point in human history did we achieve an earthly paradise with all problems solved. And you should expect that at no point in the future will we achieve that either. We solve the things in front of us and try to do our best with the new things that appear on the horizon. When I was becoming an adult, we had a world polarised into two hostile political blocs, armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons that were held on a hair trigger, and we were quite sure that nuclear war was just one accident away. Also, we were poisoning the environment with a bunch of chemicals on a daily basis. Our children's lungs were being poisoned by lead in the air because lead was a component of the fuel that cars ran on. We had a hole in the ozone layer that was increasing in size and threatening to frazzle us all with harmful UV radiation. And the world was pretty solidly divided into a rich world and a poor world, with half of the planet living in extreme poverty. Now, I don't remember arguing that somehow this was the fault of the previous generation. I do remember a bunch of people saying to me, "Oh, it will be your generation that sorts this lot out because you care more about this stuff than we did." And that may sound familiar because it's what was said also to the generation after mine, and it's being said now to the current up-and-coming generation. My generation did some astonishing things. We banned lead in petrol, which had a measurable benefit on the health of young people and even on crime rates, because it was suggested that lead-damaged young people were responsible for a swell in crime at one point. We fixed the hole in the ozone layer by telling companies we'd banned the chemicals concerned after a few years, giving them just enough time to innovate and come up with less harmful alternatives. That was the right approach, because it tackled the problem but did so in a way that didn't deprive us of the benefits that the chemicals provided for us. Now remember that principle, we'll come back to it later. We ended the Cold War without a nuclear weapon being fired. In so doing, we removed a huge tyranny that had kept a number of countries under oppressive regimes, and they moved back into the family of democratic and free countries again. And finally, we reduced absolute poverty by more than half. Whereas before there was a rich world and a poor world, now we have one that fits under a bell curve with a vast majority in the middle and gradually moving further and further in the right direction. Now, why do we so enormously discount those achievements? Because the problems were solved. We simply take the benefits that came from that as part of today's status quo. They're things that we happily take for granted. Like the fact that we can take a plane and fly across the world, a miracle of modern engineering. But we're more likely to sit on the plane and moan about the fact it doesn't have working Wi-Fi than we are to consider how incredible a time we live in compared to any other period in human history. But what about all the problems, you say? We're wrecking the planet. And you're right. Just as we had problems to solve in the 1970s and the 1980s, we have other ones to solve now, and there's no guarantee we'll do it. These are tough problems, but they are solvable. And whatever precocious 15-year-olds say at the UN, we have made some significant progress. It isn't as though all this environmental impact appeared because we started doing bad things. It predominantly came about because we've been so damn successful. We've created wealth unheard of in human history, and that may not mean much to you. But your recent ancestors lived in grinding poverty. Extreme poverty was the norm in every country across the world. And that meant people died young, disease was rampant, violence and lawlessness was the rule. But as we learned what caused disease, we became able to conquer it, we set standards of behaviour, controlled crime, we created wealth and people no longer were malnourished. And as a result, the human population began to grow like it's never done before. In the 50 years before the mid-1970s, it had doubled from 2 billion worldwide to 4. Within 5 years of today, it will have doubled again to 8 billion. Some people predicted that if you got even the numbers we had in the mid-1970s, there would be mass starvation as we outstripped our resources. But we showed that technical innovation could increase the carrying capacity of the planet, and we could become highly efficient at catering to our needs. Now here we are, and we've learned that we have to deal with the consequences of our immense success. Maybe we can live good lives with that many humans on the planet, but we have to be able to create wealth in ways that no longer add certain pollutants to the atmosphere. And we'll have to adapt some of the changes of our immense growth of numbers has brought about. And we'll have to ensure that we protect that part of the natural environment that is essential for ensuring the continuation of life on Earth, which may not be all species, but we don't always know where the knock-on effects are, so we have to be very careful about concluding it doesn't matter if some particular species becomes extinct. Now that's your challenge, because you inherit a less than perfect world. It might be that we don't do it. It might be we've grown too plentiful and the environment will deliver a fairly decisive pushback. But there is everything to play for. Lots of businesses are trying to develop business models that give us the things we want and need with zero net impact. Lots of governments have made commitments for decades and have learned a lot about some of the things that work and some of the things that don't. And no, governments can't just decide tomorrow that they're going to legislate the problem out of existence. The easy solutions generally end up hurting a lot of people, and governments have to take their people with them. Now, we've made some significant progress in developing cleaner energy sources and a range of other products that have massively reduced impact compared to the ones they've replaced. We have a long way still to go, and that's why we need all the good people we can getting involved and being part of a solution. Does that involve one generation blaming the other and suggesting it's all been about laziness and greed in one group and now has to be sorted out by the other? No, indeed. The more time we spend fighting each other, the more difficult it will be to solve the problems. Part of the problem is that we've politicised the question of climate change. The left think that they own the issue and they don't seem to care much about the value of the economic gains we've made in the last few decades, so some of their solutions would put those gains at risk. The right, on the other hand, value the economic gains but dismiss the issue because they see it as part of the agenda of the other side. Well, if this is about science, it doesn't make any sense that belief in the issue as a problem should fall along party political lines. So there are clues in there about why people believe the things they believe. We love to think that we examine the evidence and then come to our conclusions, but the studies show that we adopt the beliefs of our peer group, our social group, our identity group, and then use the facts or ignore them as needed to rationalise our belief. Part of the reason why climate change is such a difficult problem is that we need to turn it into a consensus issue. But human beings are inherently tribal. Us versus them is the most powerful rallying cry in history. And yes, it kept us alive at some points in history, but it's outdated in this case. So resist the attempts of some of the people to tell you you should be seeing this issue in terms of us versus them. No, you were not betrayed. You have an immeasurably better life today because of the things we successfully changed in the last few decades. But we face a huge challenge: how to create wealth sustainably for the future so that we keep bringing down the number of people in extreme poverty and eventually make that figure zero, whilst also avoiding finally outgrowing the planet and throwing all of that progress into reverse. With my completely unscientific gut feel, I don't give us more than a 50-50. But those are not the worst odds we've ever faced in our history. Focus on what you can do that will make a material difference in some area, whether that be engineering, politics, poverty alleviation, science, technology. Become one of the change makers. Become one of the problem solvers and join the similar change makers that came before and encourage and nurture the ones that come afterwards. We need them all. Addressing the big global issues, building vibrant local communities, helping the people that live next door. There are so many ways you can help to make things better. And this next chapter begins with you.